Hi, listener. This is From Ideology to Unity, spiritual journey where we let go of ego and ideological doctrine in favor of meaning, purpose, and unity as a whole. So today I'm doing a reading from the Red Book of C.G. Jung, A Journey into Unknown Depths by Walter Burchat. So, actually, which episode is this? I don't know. I'm not sure how many I've done yet right now, but yeah. Anyway, where we got to was mandalas in different cultures. So I'll just carry on where I left off. So what's this chapter about? This chapter is about the search for the center, which is chapter 8 of the book. So what are mandalas? Well, the Sanskrit meaning is magic circles. That's what it says. But basically Jung found them in all over, and lots of different people from different cultures drew them independently, basically. And so there's this archetypal aspect of mandalas and their symbolic meaning. Even Jung did it spontaneously, as symmetrical concentric circles. And that they kind of, quote, a way of objectifying mental content with a high emotional intensity. This way, he was able to confront and get a better understanding of the material while keeping himself separate from it. Based in these circle shapes, Jung was performing the process of active imagination. He would later define the mandala as an important part of the self as the center and totality of the psyche could manifest itself in dreams, fantasies, in the form of the mandala, expressing the organizing and structuring nature of totality. So there you go. That's what mandalas are. And so mandalas in different cultures. The mandala in its circular and symmetrical form seems to have a calming effect on emotional anxiety. Its spherical shape is an aesthetic representation of the idea of completeness, integrated totality, and the idea of the existence of a center, which, although not clearly marked, is at least inferred. Now, interestingly, there could be a sense of centeredness in the self, as in, well, being centered, and also you're in a spiritual sense. But it could have much more to it than that. Funnily enough, I actually mentioned this at the end of the last episode, actually. I even showed an image of it. So I won't show an example image for this because you've probably already seen it if you've watched the episodes up to now. And if you haven't, well, just look it up on a web search and do images and put mandala and see what comes up. So mandalas communicate the idea of the harmonious centralization of totality. They are normally circular or rectangular in shape, can contain a range of religious representations, and are used across a wide range of cultures for religious or therapeutic purposes. The most widely known mandalas are those from the Oriental religions, such as Hinduism and Tibetan Buddhism. In this context, they have an essentially calming function and can trigger deep states of meditation. Meditation in these religions uses two basic strategies to help deepen the mind, mantras and yantras. The former are magical sounds that produce specific mental states, and the latter are representations or ritual figurations that help the mind focus and open, enabling creative introspection. So mantras are like Om and the like. So yantras, well, the illustration is the Tibetan yantra. So it's like a drawing that you're meant to draw in a ritualistic way that helps calm you or something. Anyway, I'll carry on. Oriental monks used the yantra mandala in their meditations. The mandalas used in Tibetan and Chinese Buddhism are intricately decorated and represent the entire cosmos. The illustrations involve bodhisattvas and demons and a huge variation of mental states and worlds. Although mandalas are extremely complex, they maintain their circular shape and always direct inwards towards the center. The monk successfully stares at the mandala and tries to mentally repeat its complex symmetrical structure with his eyes closed. This process is repeated various times, and a calm mental state is reached when the mandala is completely visualized in the mind. The powerful therapeutic influence of the mandala itself manifests in a wide range of cultures. One of the most widely known examples is the therapeutic use of the mandala by North American Navajo Indians, whose shamans draw circular shapes in the sand for healing purposes. The beautiful stained glass windows of Chartres Cathedral in France are frequently cited example of religious mandalas in Christianity. So there you go. It's not some esoteric thing that's really strange. It's fairly common actually. Yeah, there are hypothetically links in the cultures or even the religions between even Hinduism and Christianity, but I would say they're a bit tenuous and they've diverged enough to the point that even if technically they're, Indo-European religions in some sense, like, yeah, I would say it's been noted wide enough, especially given that it's been noted in America, North America, which is arguably independent from that influence. So, yeah. So, cultural and psychological mandalas. It is essential that we distinguish the cultural mandala from what I call the psychological mandala, the latter being described by Jung in his Patient's Dreams and Fantasies. The essence of the psychological mandala is a search for a central point representing a new center of the personality that is different to the ego, the apparent reference for mental processes. Maybe that new center is the self or the soul or the observer, that consciousness, rather than the false identity, the ego, and let alone the persona. Yeah. The individuation process described by Jung is the realization of this virtual center, which he called the midpoint of the personality, existing between the ego and the unconscious. The midpoint of the personality is described in The Relations Between the Ego and the Unconscious, 1928, page 221. Jung sometimes described the individuation process as a method of rounding off, Abrundung in German, the personality. This image implies a type of spherification with the creation of a new center, both of which are properties inherent to the mandala. The previously described mandalas are cultural, as they present a strong religious or mythological character, with their images of bodhisattvas, Christian saints, or the rigorous geometry of certain Hindu mandalas created for the worship of a particular deity. Although the psychological mandala has the same objective as a cultural mandala in centralizing the personality and creating emotional stability and depth, it is a subjective and spontaneous manifestation found in dreams and fantasies. In other words, it comes from within in the same way as an archetypal symbol that manifests as part of the collective unconscious. Now, I imagine it's likely, or at least possible, that a portion of the cultural mandalas that you see might have originally been drawn as psychological mandalas. Though that doesn't seem to be what Jung was saying, but yeah. In addition, it does not necessarily have the rich the rich ornamentation of the mandalas that come from the outside world in a specific culture. Tibetan and Christian mandalas belong to a determined ritual and contain specific cultural elements. Their purpose is defined within their specific culture or religious procedure. Psychological mandalas that emerge spontaneously as part of the therapeutic process are entirely autonomous and free of the requirements associated with worship. At various points, Jung described the spontaneous appearance of psychological mandalas. One of the most important of these citations describes the impressive series of mandalas painted by a North American patient in the 1920s that contained strong archetypal references, 1950A. In this series, the individuation process, therapeutic transference, and future aspects of the patient's life, now that's interesting, appeared in a surprising way. Another notable example is the mandalas that appear in a series of dreams from a patient discussed in Psychology and Alchemy, 1945. All right, so this thing about seeing the future or future aspects of the patient's life. I mean, so I may have mentioned this idea that time is an illusion and part of the holographic reality just as space is. So in that context, and in the context of certain ways that quantum physics seems to transcend time and locality and space, it suggests to me that, well, that's the context or the basis of a mandala predicting the future, essentially. In this case, Jung clearly defines a mandala as a form of spontaneous and automatic expression of the psyche in search of totality. This series of dreams precluded an intense process of psychological transformation. Pardon me. Precluded an intense series of psychological transformation. So, just to me, that's part of an overall process. Perhaps being guided through a psychological process by the spirit guides. And of course, that isn't what Jung said. This series of dreams, I already said that. We know today that the dreamer Jung mentions in Psychology and Alchemy is Wolfgang Pauli, the 1946 Nobel Prize-winning physicist who collaborated with Jung in his studies of synchronicity. Wow, that's pretty interesting. That really is. And of course, synchronicity transcends time. That's something that even Jung pointed out. Because, for example, and you might come across this when I did the reading of the book Synchronicity by Carl Jung. There's this, Jung in the text refers to these studies that were done where people know these cards or like these different symbols on them, and people try to, I guess, using psychic ability, essentially, read what they are, right? Now, there's a certain statistical probability of getting it right, but there's certain people who seem to consistently like get it right in an improbable way, essentially. And whereas, and that there is a connection, like in terms of belief seems to impact the likelihood of getting it right slightly as well. And what they did is they found that insofar as there's a, and he did tests actually as well, looking at star signs and stuff. Anyway, and marriage success or failure, or whether people who married who, sort of thing. That's a tangent anyway. But basically, essentially, what they found is that not just that people can do it across the world, not just in the other room, right? And there's no difference. But there's no difference even if it's done at different points in time, as in people being shown, i.e. people guessing what a card in the future will be or what was in the past, right? So but that's when the actual test was done, ahead of it or after it or before it. It made no difference, which shows that synchronicity transcends space and time, especially that it transcends time. And that these are kind of like, synchronicity is kind of like acausal. It's like, or at least transcends regular causality and transcends time and space. And it's like a meaningful coincidence. That's how it's defined as well. So it's like, it's symbolically meaningful and it's unlikely, right? So you see, you get a series of numbers coming up in your life, right? And you suppose you keep seeing the sequence or sequences of numbers, and it happens to a statistically improbable degree. And then you look at the meaning, and it's like, the numerology, this number sequence means this. And you look at life and you see it reflecting what's going on in your life. And at a different point, something else going on in your life. And it's a different set of numbers comes up. And symbolically, it connects to what's happening then. Or something happens that isn't numbers. And you see something that's symbolically associated with something. For example, a fish symboling the age of Pisces, which is something that Jung got when he was when he was writing one of his works. Anyway, I will continue with the, I will continue. Yes, I'll continue where I was, reading from where I was. In the first dream, the initial manifestation of the symbol of the mandala appears in a surprising way. The dreamer finds himself at a party. He is getting ready to leave and he sees the image of a stranger's hat he places on his head. Jung amplifies the image of the hat through its association with the king's crown and power, and then expands on the rounded shape of the hat as a manifestation of the mandala, foreshadowing, wow, I got it wrong twice. Foreshadowing, wow, okay. Foreshadowing the start of a search for totality. So Jung said that in the dream, or he said that after the dream? I don't know. The theme of the hat returns later in the dream during 35, in which a character picks up a hat and throws it against a wall, leaving behind a circular shape of a mandala divided into 8 parts. On page 185. Wow. Interesting. Maybe the symbolism of 8 has significance here, and I don't know what that is. So I guess look it up, because I'm not doing that right now. I'm not going to be browsing in the middle of this. The image of the mandala also has a strong presence in subsequent dreams, and it was very different to the mandalas of Tibetan Buddhism or the Navajo Indians. In many instances, it was not even circular. In one dream, for example, the mandala appears in the form of a large rectangle with smaller rectangles on its edges. The center of the larger rectangle is a star, and in the middle of each side rectangle is a colored circle. Dream 51 on page 192. This demonstrates that the dynamic of it focusing around a center, which represents the search for centralization, is more important than it having a circular shape. I consider this factor to be significant in order to detect symbolism, the symbolism of the mandala in the therapeutic process. So yes, the person's center, maybe the observation point, the point from which observation is made, that is, yeah, as I said, the self, the soul. The mandala as part of the analytical process. Owing to the fact that the mandala is one of the most important symbols of the self and the archetype of the center, many hastily believe that its appearance in a patient's fantasies indicates a process of maturation, the integration of opposites, or that the patient is entering into the final process of an analysis. However, this is not always the case. Unconscious symbols should always be approached according to the conscious perspective of the dreamer. I'll say this again, according to the conscious perspective of the dreamer. Because otherwise it's like this detached psychologist like Freud is saying, I'm going to tell you what it all means, and it doesn't matter what it means to you, not relevant. I'm just going to talking down at people in a sort of top-down way, just like, let me tell you what your issue is. And that's something Jung didn't really like. That's the impression I get. And he very much, as part of why he went in a different direction, there's certain issues with that sort of analytical psychology. And that it's perhaps too impersonal. And surely the information you get from the patient isn't merely like just hard data you can say, okay, you can look at without recognition of their own subjective contents, right? You have to be sensitive when you're dealing with, if psychology has got a lot of subjectivity in it, why take that subjectivity out of it? Okay, you want to have rigorous analysis, sure, but that's just trying to make psychology what it isn't and trying to deny that aspect of the mind and trying to make the mind conform to a neat and tidy formulation in a way that isn't really, it's a bit forced and a bit unrealistic. Anyway, so that isn't what Jung was doing, though. Or at least not to the same degree. Okay. When they appear in drawings, dreams, and fantasies, mandalas can actually indicate a psychological crisis or a danger of the psyche splitting, of psychic splitting. In his use of metaphors to compare psychic processes to biological or natural phenomena, Jung started to associate the appearance of psychic mandalas to an increase in leukotrites, the white blood cells, which are also rounded in shape. A large quantity of white blood cells are produced during infections in order to combat disease and reinstate the body's balance, the so-called shift to the left that can be observed on a hemogram. When psychic equilibrium is at risk, the rounded archetype of the self and totality and a symbol of totality appears to center and restore balance. Okay, so either way, in the case of maturation, okay, it's a step towards centralizing the self. So it does increase its stability in a sense, and it does do that in a situation where there's an imbalance and it's helping with the unbalance. Before, the only thing is, in the first situation, it's like a step forward. When the second situation, it's like there's been a step back and it's just a step back to that position, which is kind of a step forward relatively, but whatever. The radical compensation of mandalas is in dissociative states was also researched by Nisei de Silveira, founder of the Museum of the Unconscious in Rio de Janeiro, Silveira, 1980. Silveira collected an impressive collection of archetypal images produced by psychotics for the museum. The cataloguing of these images was carried out in conformity with the collection method used at the Archive for Research in Archetypal Symbolism, ARAS, in New York, by which images are catalogued in relation to their archetypal meaning. One of the catalogued themes is the mandala, and a range of albums containing images with a mandala theme have been put together. These contain an impressive variety of colors and motifs, all of which express the search for centeredness. All of them. This significant incident of mandalas in the drawing of schizophrenics, from exquizo, meaning splitting, and phrenos, meaning mind, that seems to be sounds more like dissociative disorder to me, but they seem to be conflated at this point in the development of psychology. So this tendency, this incidence in schizophrenics is due to the intense internal splitting they experience. Healing processes originating from the self, attempting to bring these parts together, centralize and reestablish equilibrium. But the psyche splits again as part of the psychotic process in a tragic repetitive cycle. Yeah, that sounds sad. I frequently observe mandalas in my clinical practice in both psychotic and non-psychotic patients. One clinical example demonstrates this perfectly. One of my patients with a very complicated family life was living with her widowed mother and 2 sisters. They were extremely aggressive, and the patient often came to her consultations with scratched arms and in a state of silent depression. The consultations often included long moments of silence in which the patient retreated into a melancholy state. On a number of occasions, she made mysterious gestures on her knees with her fingers as if she was drawing something. Only after these strange gestures would she look at me and start to speak. In my consultation room, I provide crayons, pastels, and colored pencils and other materials for non-verbal expression. I suggested that she try to draw the shape that she ritualistically designed upon her knee. Illustration 3 was drawn by the patient in the red-colored pencil with violent gestures and little care, and is highly symbolic of her anger and loathing. So illustration 3 is mandalas and transference. I'll show you if you're watching this, that is. If you're listening, not so easy. But you can see that it's kind of haphazardly drawn, and you can see just how she was angrily just sort of sketching it down in a haphazard way. It really, that aspect of it gets across the anger and loathing as well. So, but that symbol is, it looks like an hourglass. But you could say it's a bit like an infinity symbol as well. So just with one triangle and another triangle in the opposite direction. Also, an upward triangle and a downward triangle, when you merge them together, forms a Jewish star, which is a... Man, I forgot what the word for that is. I know the word for that. It's Merkaba. Yeah, that's it, the Merkaba. Or at least the 2D version of the Merkaba. And of course, the upward being representing the phallus and the downward representing the vagina, which is essentially representing masculine and feminine energies and the balance of both of them, which makes it similar to the yin yang symbol, symbolically. Anyway, that's what I'm getting from that image, but it's in red, so I don't think it's about balance. Or is it? Because maybe in that anger is a center, and if you're seeing the image, it's basically right there, just right between those 2 triangles. That's the center. That is the center, and it is symmetrical, loosely. And even in the midst of all that anger, there's a centeredness and there is a balance between both sides, sort of, right? So rooted in all that unbalanced negative emotion is actually the potential for transformation, right? So, and anyway, from what I hear, schizophrenics can actually get out of that tragic repetitive cycle. There's a YouTube video about it, multiple actually, probably a number of them around, but there's a woman telling a story about her journey. The people have told stories about basically there's signs that's like the schizophrenics, what they have is signs in what they're seeing that give clues that actually, if they actually follow those, actually lead them to sanity. Essentially, that it's like it lead them through, more like leading them through an individuation process. And by following these signs, that they can actually recover. There was this person saying they were diagnosed with schizophrenia, they were given the medication, they massively declined after the medication. Then they stopped using the medication against the doctor's advice and started following the signs, which is what the psychiatrist would say is a terrible idea, and a lot of psychologists would say it's a terrible idea. Yet they then is when they started making significant progress, and eventually lost the diagnosis. They were no longer considered. So I can't give you the exact video of that because I don't know off the top of my head. I'm not going to search for it in the bit of the video in the middle of this episode. But yeah, and there's other examples as well, where basically the idea that they're shamans, they just don't realize it, and that there is actually, but even without the idea that they're shamans, there's this idea that there's the mind and senses giving you hints. The shaman idea might be that spirits are giving you hints or whatever, I don't know. But no, I understand the reaction to people who are more secular. It might be, well, the light really doesn't work on this room, does it? It makes you look pale. Anyway, so what was I saying? Yeah, saying that maybe lose track. Yeah, so essentially they'd say, oh, that's like bad, detrimental for them, right? You're saying that, but that's based on their premises, so whatever. Anyway, so that's an interesting symbol. Let's see what it says about it. Anyway, this is clearly a mandala. The two triangles meet at a central point. This represents the centralization of the mandala in a non-circular form, with opposites coming together at a central point. The transcendent function of the self is an operation, allowing the patient to organize herself and connect with me through her depressive chaos, verbalize, listen to interpretations, and integrate the entire process. In order for these differentiated mechanisms of analysis to work, the archetype of the self had to manifest in the form of a psychological mandala. The transition was made here from the non-verbal to the verbal, from the depth of the archetypal to a more favorable relationship dynamics, And if you associate the self with the soul, then, or the observer consciousness, that gives us a big clue about the role that it plays in resolving psychological issues and stuff. Another clinical example, this time from a psychotic patient, reveals the mysterious and autonomous protective influence that the mandala has over the psyche. One day, a patient of mine suffering from a serious case of bipolar disorder had a major manic episode. He thought he was being followed by dangerous enemy forces. Panic-stricken, he hailed a cab and ordered the driver to drive around the city in search of protection. Finally, he told him to stop at a branch of the old National Bank. He paid the fare, got out of the taxi, and stood motionless under the bank's then famous sign, illustration 4. So that is the sign, if you're watching the video, that is. So what is this? I'm not sure how to explain it. Yeah, I don't even know how to explain that symbol, so sorry. I'm just gonna have to read and you'll get it then that way, if you're listening. A closer look at this design shows that it is a mandala with clockwise dynamic movement, which symbolizes moving from the unconscious to the conscious. Perhaps this is why he felt the bank's logo was able to protect him, as it transmits a feeling of the unconscious emptying and strengthening, and the strengthening of the conscious. And this is exactly what the endangered patient needed at the time. In this moment of impending danger, the protection offered by the image of the mandala provided a sort of psychological relief. And that's fascinating. There is a sort of symbolism 3 there. To those who saw it, there's this white triangle in the middle, right? Made from the gap between the 3 black images. They're like, okay, so imagine if you've got a triangle and coming off around them, coming off from that, the white triangle is 3 black going around clockwise. It's 3 triangles, except they're not triangles because they're curved around the side and the outside. But, and then there's gaps between them that's like light, almost like 3 rays of light coming out from the center, the self. But there's also 3 black bits as well. So they could be seen as voids. Do we look at the black and consider that to be the void, or the white and consider that to be the void of which the solid is black? Depends on perspective. You can look at it both ways. But either way, that's interesting. One way, it's like the self is radiating outwards, the light of consciousness. The other way, it's in 3 different ways, light. I'm not sure about that one. But there's also a sense of movement, like it's a wheel, or that's a dynamic process, a transformation. And there's a spherical nature to it all as well. So there's a holism to that too. And a cycle is also linked to circle, which is, so yeah, a cyclical process. What more does it say here? And also consider that he was drawn there without consciously knowing what that represented, or that symbol was there necessarily. So there was something guiding him within him, which knew more than he consciously knew, and knew what was at a place he'd potentially never been to before. Think about that. It knew, part of him knew what was at a place he'd never been to before, and what symbol was there, and the symbolic meaning of that, and directed him to that. And so unless it was a spirit guide or something, it's likely that it was part of his own mind itself, the self, essentially, or the soul, the I am presence, even if he was unconscious of that I am presence, guiding him to where he needed to be. And that's really interesting. So it almost seems to indicate a soul, like something more than ego existing. So it's kind of, I can't really use that as evidence per se, but it kind of is evidence for either dualism or pantheism or something. This is an interesting example of the transformation of a sign into a symbol. The sign, in the case of the unique and well-known logo of a bank, is transformed by the magical thinking of a psychotic into the powerful symbol of the mandala, offering protection against mysterious forces. This phenomenon, the transformation of a sign into a symbol, is the opposite of a more common reduction of symbols into signs, where the reductive interpretations are made of symbols in dream analyses. These were highly criticized by Jung, especially given that it's reductionist about the interpretation of symbols in dream analyses. So the idea is you can't just say that symbol means this. You need to look in meaning and symbolism in relation to context and subjective interpretation in that patient. You know, what it suggests to me is actually that divination is a lot more meaningful when done by the person who's basically when someone's doing a reading for themselves. Whereas relying on someone else's divination doesn't involve your psychology, it involves the diviner's psychology, which fundamentally makes it less personalized and maybe less like to work. That said, divination probably requires a certain degree of connection to self to even pull off. I don't know, pretty worth trying out. I've been trying out with runes, Norse runes, and I found that pretty interesting, but I'm relatively new to it. But I feel that I get more out of it than when I've looked at videos for my star sign and tarot readings for that. I've often found it more meaningful than that. Not that those are never meaningful, sometimes they are, but it's kind of here's the thing with those, anyone of the certain star sign can read it and interpret it differently. And that may be taken as a criticism of them generally. But at the same time, it's a flexibility in that as well, because it means that different situations and contexts that are personal to each person can be applied to interpreting what they mean. Anyway, Oriental Mandalas. Writing about the appearance of the content from Liber Novus in Jung's later work, Shamdazani, 2012a, relates the spiraled non-linear way in which the author gradually took ownership of his rich inner experiences and translates them into psychological concepts. In this context, the discovery of the symbolic importance of the mandala has an important resonance in the Chinese alchemic treatise The Secret of the Golden Flower, Jung, 1967. Shamdazani refers to this in the following excerpt. Before taking up alchemy, later finished Liber Novus, we see that Jung engaged in an Eastern intermezzo, which has been somewhat neglected in this regard. The situation becomes clearer if one realizes that the commentary on The Secret of the Golden Flower is, in many respects, placed in the wrong volume of the collected works. It shouldn't be in volume 13, Alchemical Studies, but in volume 2, Psychology and Eastern Religion, page 368. Jung's biggest interest when the sinologist Richard Wilhelm sent him his book was not yet alchemy, but the constellation of the mandala, or the circular course of the light, as it is called in the treatise. Jung wanted the mobile phone. Jung wanted the text to confirm his findings on the importance of the mandala and its association with the symbolism of the self. Only later would the area of alchemy become important to him, which to me is an example of sometimes we discover something, we come across something, and we don't know why we have it. And then when it comes to the time when we're ready, there comes a use in that, right? And there's a sort of divine timing to things that even involves our own psychology, involved with interacting with things external. So it's a sort of synchronicity, which is, well, synchronicity typically connects the mind of an internal person with outside events. And if everything is holistically connected in a quantum field, let's say, because quantum, spiritual, source field, you know, it's all the same. Yeah, that would make sense. The mandala continued to be an important source of information in his joint research with Wilhelm Hoare on the symbolism of Kundalini Yoga, Jung, 1999. Kundalini Yoga, eh? And you may well be aware of that, of what it is, or at least have some idea. Now, that's not something I've actually done or particularly looked into, but I'm aware of Kundalini Yoga. I'm vaguely aware of what the Kundalini is. It's a sort of spiraling, snake-like movement. As your consciousness goes up your chakras and up your spine simultaneously, it's kind of like as you activate all the chakras, if you're ready to anyway, that it basically is a sudden moment of breakthrough with awakening, basically. As your consciousness rises up and it gets your third eye or whatever, it connects with light from above that enters the crown chakra or something. Interestingly, there is this idea in what's this guy called? The guy who's like, he helps people heal from any injury, and he healed from a terrible spinal injury. And it's to do with spinal fluid moving up and down your spine. And that is very helpful for health and psychology and spirituality as well. What's the guy called? He's some guy at common stuff. Can't remember the guy's name. It's frustrating. Oh well. It's to do with like how letting people heal naturally without relying on medicine or whatever. Breathing exercises. You probably know who I'm talking about. I've gone blank. Anyway, Joe Dispenza. That's him. Joe Dispenza. This Indian tradition represents the chakras as padmas, lotus flowers, in the form of mandalas intricately decorated with complex symbolism. Now that I'm sure you're aware of if you've done those meditations. On Meditative Mind in particular on YouTube, it has this, it shows these lotus symbols of each of the chakras for chakra meditation music. Yeah, it's quite interesting. It's quite nice. I especially recommend the Heart Chakra one. A psychological approach to the chakras shows that they involve a sophisticated symbology associated with a specific state of consciousness. In his work with Heinrich Zimmer, a researcher of the Indian religions, Jung reached further into the meaning of the mandala as part of Indian rituals and as an important psychological symbol. So, to overview them briefly, in case you don't know, there's at the bottom, between the legs, there's the root chakra or Red Ray Chakra, which is associated with basic survival and fundamental sexual instincts, to do with the fundamentals of it. The Orange Ray Chakra, which I can't remember the name of right now because, yeah, perfect timing, eh? The Orange Ray Chakra is to do with, it's relation to interactions between, well, generally the opposite sex, well, unless you're gay, of course, but whatever. It's your relationship with other people in terms of your sexuality. It might involve dating, but it might involve, sex as well. That's the sex side of it, sexuality side of it. But obviously in other senses, it's about your relationships with other people generally, right? Especially like friendships and stuff like that. That's the impression I've got. Now, an imbalance in this, in any of these chakras, can take the form of an excess or a detriment of something. So an excess of interest in sex, or being overly ashamed and avoidant of it. Like both of these things would be unbalancing it. And then you get to the sacral chakra, I think. It was sacral orange, the yellow ray chakra anyway. And the yellow chakra, which is, okay, so the orange ray is like in your belly sort of area. In your lower chest, I'd say, is the yellow ray chakra. The yellow ray chakra is to do with more complex relationships and your role in society and your social, the role and the position in social society as well. Very much the form that the ego has taken in us in our society very much is yellow ray with a bit of orange ray, I would say. It's to do with like which clique you're in. If at school, for example, it involves yellow ray, doing your taxes, like legal stuff, journalism, a lot of the complex stuff, but without not involving an open heart and unconditional love. So most people often don't open the heart. So most people just use the bottom three chakras. And yeah, the heart chakra is the green ray chakra in the heart. Well, at least it's not to the left, it's in the middle of your chest, but around where your heart is. And that's to do with unconditional love. And that's loving yourself as well as loving others. For this, you need to know yourself, accept yourself, forgive yourself. And that way you can unconditionally love yourself. And when you've got, that allows you to have a full cup, which allows you to overflow with love unconditionally for others. And that's what unconditional love of others comes from. And that's what enables that. That's my idea of it anyway. Then there's other chakras, the throat chakra, which is communication, but also truth, clarity, and wisdom. The third eye chakra is about wisdom in its own set, right, I think, but it's more about, I forgot. Orange ray is also about creativity, but not in the same sense that the third eye chakra is. And the third eye involves your psychic gifts, let's say. It involves psychic abilities, essentially. So, of various different kinds, including like seeing the future or whatever. Like, there's various different things. I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of it, but yeah, it can take different forms of different people as well, like just being able to know things or just being able to hear things mentally or whatever, telepathy, all sorts of stuff. Interesting. Then you got then the top one, the seventh one, is the crown chakra, which is to do with your connection to source, essentially, to the divine. Anyway, back to where we were. The centralization of the conscious on the circular padmas of the chakras is very interesting from a psychological point of view. The introverted mystics of Indian antiquity intuited these as specific centers of consciousness along the body, and today we recognize these as an important contribution to the understanding of the soul and of unconscious phenomena. After his important Eastern intermezzo, as Shamdazani named it, Jung started to study yoga and tantra. His research on the psychological significance of the chakras presented in the Kundalini Yoga seminar are very insightful. The chakras can be understood to be binding mandalas of psychic energy. The location of these mandalas immediately deconstructs the powerful modern fantasy that we only have a cortical consciousness. Now keep in mind, when this is psychic, in the Jungian sense, psychic doesn't mean the sense that we regularly mean psychic abilities. It just means in relation to the psyche. Although I do think that there are psychic aspects of the psyche, but yeah. Cortical. I wish I knew the exact definition of that. I don't have a dictionary in here, I don't think. No. I'm going to have to look that up. Well, look up cortical and you'll know what it means, I guess. I guess it's a more limited, straightforward idea. Maybe linear comes to mind somehow as maybe what cortical is on about, kind of, as opposed to more holistic, more reductionistic, I suppose you could say. And it doesn't just treat it as, well, there's the ego and that's you. It doesn't treat it that way. On the contrary, following the Eastern journey that Jung embarked on, we can see that there are various levels of consciousness possible, and that the cortical consciousness of the present-day Western world is just one of the types of consciousness possible. Studying the symbology of the chakras, Jung saw each of these as a universe of consciousness with its own symbolism, number of petals, colors, animal figures, and natural elements. The Manipura Chakra, for example, is situated close to the stomach and the solar plexus. This center symbolizes a type of consciousness governed by automatic reactions and dominated by the fiery emotions. This is the stomach center where the energies of the gastric juices burn and digest food. When we are in the stomach, we speak and react in a highly emotional way. Our emotions do not reach the level of the heart, and we cannot articulate our ideas clearly. I'm sure you've experienced that before. I certainly have. Anything can happen when we operate on the level of the stomach, as we react irrationally and fear and aggression often take over. This is an example of how the yogic perspective of there being various centers of consciousness along the body is rich and differentiated, and how it contributes to a new approach to the unconscious. This approach can be used to overcome the dilemmas of body and mind associated with Western culture. I suppose it can represent just a sort of sense of the Western idea of it. Maybe cortical is very more one-dimensional. Conscious, unconscious. I suppose you could say dualistic. and also just identifying one location as typically identifying one location as where consciousness is. I mean, even Jung goes beyond what normally is how consciousness is identified in Western psychology. Illustration 5. A mandala for present-day man, Systema Munditius. Munditotius. From the Red Book by C.G. Jung, edited by, there's a bunch of information about it. Now, if you're watching the video, I will show you. Oh, wait, there it is. So that's a mandala, right? It's got a center. It looks like it's got planets. It's got some angel figure. So, but it looks very symbolic as well. Systema Munditotius, an inner cosmos in Liber Novus. The mandala that Jung designed in 1916, which he considered to be his first mandala, Shamdasani 2012b, was described by Shamdasani as a veritable inner cosmos. See illustration 5. It uses the formula that Paracelsus developed, where the microcosmos replicates the macrocosmos, and the inner space of an individual is a miniature cosmos equivalent to the outer cosmos. So the law of correspondence that's one of the Hermetic laws, otherwise known as above, so below, as below, so above, which also includes as within, so without, as without, so within, right? So basically that at every level of reality, the corresponding patterns can be found in one way or another. The Systema Munditius, the system of the whole world, is a whole universe. It is mathematically symmetrical and has a quaternary structure. It brings together the new ideas and intuitions that Jung produced during his confrontation with the unconscious. This mandala is made up of expressive figures from the world of gnosis and classical mythology, as Jung described. So, gnosis is related to Gnosticism, which does have links to Hermeticism actually, but is most known as a form of Christianity with certain supposed heresies, like the Cathars, for example. So, as Jung described, it portrays the antinomies of the microcosm within the macrocosmic world and its antinomies. At the very top, the figure of the young boy in the winged egg, called Erikapeos or Phanes, and thus reminiscent of a spiritual figure of the Orphic gods. His dark antithesis in the depths is here and designated as Abraxas. He represents the Dominus Mundi, the lord of the physical world, and is a world creator of ambivalent nature. Sprouting from him, we see the tree of life labeled Beta, brackets life, while in its upper counterpart is a light tree in the form of a 7-branched candelabra labeled Ignis, fire, and Eros, love. Its light points to the spiritual world of the divine child. The accompanying animals of the natural world are a devilish monster and a larva. As in like larvae, I imagine. I don't know for sure, but yeah. This signifies death and rebirth. A further division of the mandala is horizontal. To the left, we see a circle indicating the body or the blood, and from it rears a serpent, which winds itself around the phallus as the generative principle. The serpent is dark and light, signifying the dark realm of the earth, the moon, and the void, therefore called Saturnus. So you could link that to Saturnus, but it's a Saturnus, or Satan, obviously, symbolically. So there's some, before we go into what Walter Burchett says about it, what do I see in it? Well, at the beginning it talks about dealing with the law of correspondence, essentially. A boy in a winged egg, well, egg represents birth, right? And new, something new, maybe even rebirth. Winged maybe represents air. Oh, I see. Yeah, it does look like a winged egg. That's very interesting. It seems to represent maybe the self in some sense. Now, Phanes is a symbol represented in. It is a in other episodes of this book, Phanes has been mentioned. I know that. I can't remember what the situation was, but was Phanes a like a magician figure? Maybe. I'm not sure. So going back, I'm not sure I can find it, so I'll just carry on. Yeah, what else? Well, reminiscent of a spiritual figure of the Orphic gods. Now, Orphism is actually a sort of pantheistic sort of spirituality. And was it, now if I remember correctly, it was either Dacian sort of thing, that around like Romania sort of area maybe, or was it, no, it involved Greek aspects, and maybe it was something in Bosphorus, like I'm not sure, one of the two. It might have involved the Greeks in some way, like an offshoot of Greek, ancient Greek mythology in some sense. So there's a light and a dark here. So the dark antithesis of depth is designated as Abraxas. Although interestingly, Abraxas does have light and dark aspects and opposites to it as a figure. Abraxas isn't merely entirely dark. But Abraxas is considered in Gnosticism to be, while not the demiurge, while an archon, the highest of the archons, and actually either neutral or not as bad as the others. Now, Abraxas, it says about Abraxas, but it's always Abraxas, I think. Abraxas is it's got like a chicken head and like serpents as the legs or something. There's interesting symbology in that. It's a Gnostic symbol, but it's considered, yes, a law of the physical world. So the creator of everything physical in some sense, but not considered to be the demiurge, I don't think. Demiurge is something else, but it's like a negative. That would be maybe the dark side of Abraxas itself. I don't know. I'm not sure about that. But the demiurge is supposed to have created the physical world, but in misshapen sort of ways, basically, rather than in a divine sort of harmony. So, sprouting from him, which is interesting, we see, right, so we see the tree of life. Now, this seems to almost relate to, well, there's this idea literally of a tree representing life. There's this idea of the, in the, what's it called? The Jewish tree of life. In Jewish mysticism. The Kabbalah. In the Kabbalah, the tree of life in the Kabbalah, which has these different sections or spheres representing different aspects of consciousness, but also reality. I think. Now, I don't know, there's a lot I don't know about it. It's an aspect of mysticism I know a little bit about only. Though there is someone I've interviewed so far who does know a lot about it and recently did a good video about it, going into quite a lot of depth about it. And he's done a number of videos. What's the guy called? Seekers of Unity, that's the guy. I'll check him out. Honestly, he's got way more subscribers than me right now, so it's likely you're more likely to know about him than me, but I guess. Where was I? All right, so then obviously the world tree, it also reminds me of the world tree, which is a Norse idea, which is linked to an idea of holism. Nothing about it. The tree of life and the world tree idea do seem to have similarities in a certain sense. So that's representing your life, right? And the upper counterpart is a light tree in the form of a 7-branch candelabra. So a light tree is different, but it seems to be, well, it's kind of like a tree, but it's more like a type of candle. But the symbolism is there, representing Ignis and Eros. So love fire, right? The flame of love. Now, this makes me think of this in the Emerald Tablets. Thoth of the Atlantean describes this. He seems to talk about the soul as a, well, it's very much pantheistic, right? Panpsychism. It's the idea that the soul is a spark, right? So this fire being linked with consciousness. I mean, fire illuminates, light comes out of it. There's a burning fire of being, I suppose you could say. It's like a fire, right? Now, it might be shrouded in darkness in some cases, or it might be brighter in other cases. And sometimes it can become a fire. And that's just a matter of intensity, or maybe frequency. But fundamentally, it's the same essence, and it's all source, right? That's the idea. Now, it being love light makes sense, right? Love light is Eros. If you know about the law of one, this idea that fundamental fire is also love in its very nature. Love is a matter of creation. It's a very motherly sort of concept, not just motherly, but you know what I mean. Yeah, and it's also linked to wisdom. Wisdom is fundamentally linked to it as well. So it's a divine, wise life fire of consciousness or something. Anyway, that's what it makes me think of. Its light points to the spiritual world of the divine child being symbolically linked to the self and thus the soul and thus source in a sense, in a pantheistic sense. The accompanying animals of the natural world are a devilish monster and a larvae. So there's the more nature sense, or the sense of rebirth and a sense of life in the larva, but also a devilish monster is like, there's definitely a negative aspect to the material world or material life in a sense. I mean, the serpent and the body of the blood, I'm not sure exactly what that represents. One thing could be the Kundalini serpent, but it can be other things as well. It could even be a sort of spiraling up. That could be a spiraling process of many things spiral, like DNA spirals. If you take a circle, but take it in 3 going round, you look at the orbit of planets around the sun, right? The sun's moving along, and the Earth and planets move around in a circle or an oval, right? Whatever. But the truth is, if it's moving through space in a certain direction, the way planets follow it, it's like a spiral, right? Which also is like the kind of like double helix of DNA, right? So And if you think about the hero's journey as a circle, but repeating in an upward direction, then it's basically actually a spiral spiraling up as to a series of raising of consciousness. And of course, the hero's journey is considered to repeat. So these things are linked. And as it says here, this signifies death and rebirth. And there is transformation is fundamentally symbolically involves death and rebirth, symbolically speaking. And when you die, it is a shift. Your consciousness doesn't really end. It just takes a different form. It's not rooted to a physical body anymore until you go back into a new body, which is a new incarnation. And of course, these aren't necessarily things that Jung was aware of, or at least his I am presence might have been, I don't know, but like not consciously, right, at this point. Or he didn't seem to believe in these things. Maybe he did, I don't know, but probably not. So, yeah. Serpents is dark and light, and we find the dark realm of the earth, the moon and the void. It does remind me, you know, of the Emerald Tablets of Hermes, when there's this reference to the earth and the moon. Now, the earth and moon, in terms of hermetics, seem to be like one is a masculine. No, wait, I'm not sure. It's like the earth being feminine, the moon being masculine, or something? I think so. I'm not sure, actually. The moon comes out at night. But obviously Mother Earth is Gaia. That would be more feminine. So typically, I mean, you could say that the sun is more masculine, right? I mean, Ra is male, right? Actually, I mean, not the, I mean more in a mythological figure, right? I don't mean the actual consciousness that is literally, essentially incarnating in the sun, in the Lord One sense, that was channeled, that was originally the is a group, you know, the consciousness of all the inhabitants that were once on Venus. Well, that's something else. Well, but it's called Saturnus, so I don't know where that fits into it, but that's what I got from it. Let's see what it says about it. While contemplating the sophisticated cosmology of the Systema Monditochus, we are transported to the complex symbolism of the mandalas of Tibetan Buddhism. These recreate various worlds, spaces, and dimensions inhabited by a wide variety of beings. What his... oh well. I'm sorry, I'm not going to do it. Gods and demons representing the various states of being. In the system of Monditius, doorways to multiple symbolic universes are devised. The elements contained in the mandala are carefully included to represent important moments from Liber Novus, meaningful journeys and experiences as part of a process of self-discovery. Fascinating. And of course, that these various gods, demons, and bodhisattvas, or whatever, reminds me of the Law of One. Although it may seem impossible to exhaust the possibilities of the rich symbology of these images, some clues can be picked out that reveal a path taken by Jung through his inner cosmos. Firstly, the mandala performs a role present in every configuration of its type. It orders and centralizes. Its strict symmetry has an organizing effect on the psychological content at a time when Jung was assimilating his unconscious experiences. The unconscious is chaotic by nature, and in order to be integrated, it needs organizing symbols. The Systema Monditius has a quaternary structure involving vertical and horizontal polarities. On the left of the horizontal polarity are obscure chthonic symbols, the phallus, the serpent, and the earth. On the right, there are celestial symbols, the dove of the Holy Spirit, the chalice of the Spirit, and the water of life. The vertical polarity also brings together opposites. At the top, there is Erikapeos, or Phanes, the celestial youth and the Eros of the ancient Orphic mysteries. At the very bottom is Abraxas, the Lord of the world. Above him is the Tree of Life. In the corresponding position on the upper part of the vertical axis, there is a Tree of Light in the shape of the candelabra. Linked to this Tree of Light is a winged serpent representing the arts and a winged rat representing the sciences. Phanes Eros is an important god, is a central god of Orphism, a mystical initiatory movement that flourished in Greece during the 6th century BC. There you go, that's more accurate than what I said. According to the Orphic cosmogony, he was born from a silver egg hatched by Nyx, the blackbird of the night. In the passage describing the encounter with Iztabar, the hatching of the god from an egg and its resurgence in the form of Eros Phanes expressed the need for this ancient mythological tradition, personified by Iztabar, to survive in a modern world dominated by one-sided rationality. See chapter 4. I don't know which particular episode I addressed this in my readings here, but yeah, definitely. If you haven't seen those, I recommend seeing them in order. To be honest, yeah, I do, because there's a sort of, this builds on what's previously built up, right, through the text. Anyway, where was I? In the Systema Mondutius, the supreme god of Orphism has a strong presence. So, why does Orphic symbology have such an important role in Liber Novus? Well, the first thing I'd say is because it's pantheistic. But to answer this question, the importance of Orphism as a mystery religion in the ancient world must be considered. In order to do this, concepts introduced by the researchers of the ancient religions, particularly Robert Graves, Junichio Brandao, and Walter Willey, must be used. The mystery religions included an elaborate ritual based on a myth, the central element being the death of the old personality and the rebirth of a new one. I do wonder if that is connected to the Oracle at Delphi and the drugs that were taken when people visited the Oracle at Delphi, who themselves, or herself, themselves, you know, the oracles themselves were on hallucinogenic drugs. There's no question of that. They therefore contained a soteriological element relating to salvation for the mysters or initiates. Orphism has had very particular characteristics that set it apart from the other mystery religions, such as Eleusinian and Dionysian rituals. It has strong Eastern influence, and its followers believed in metempsychosis and abstained from eating eggs, which they considered to be the origin of life. It was therefore a rather ascetic religion. Hence, Orphism presents very particular characteristics in comparison to official Homeric religion of the time. The latter did not involve issues such as individual blame and personal salvation, but placed the blame on the genos, the family or social group. The individual could take on the blame of the whole group, and all family members were responsible for the transgressions of individual members. Any wrong committed by one of the members contaminated the whole group with a miasma, from the Greek spreading stain. The doctrine of blame and reparation in the official Homeric religion was based on the morality of the family group. The Christian concept of sin did not exist at the time, but blame and reparation were a hamartia, a word that derives from the verb hamartien, meaning to miss the mark. Brandao, 1986. So, yeah, it seems that it's different times, huh? But that's not very nice at all, in my opinion, but that's subjective. Yeah, so in the story of Troy, Paris took Helen, right? So from the perspective, in the story, from the perspective of Menelaus, what this was an egregious offense essentially by all of them. And so it wasn't just, oh, Paris did this, let's get back at him. No. We're going to do this we want revenge on the Trojans. So that seems to represent in a sense. That might help clarify a little bit, I think, what the thinking is. Well, it kind of explains it there as well. Identity was seen very much on a family basis. Might be like Game of Thrones is kind of like that, isn't it? Like when the Starks were like, kind of like, they lost some family members, right? When they were like absolutely wanted to wipe out the Lannisters because of it. It's just like, yeah, whatever. According to Junito Brendel, the discovery of the gold tablets, yeah, I don't think, yeah, I'm skipping ahead a paragraph. In addition, the official religion of the time did not allow the possibility for post-mortem salvation. On the contrary, Homeric religion included the concept of Hades, the world of the dead, where the soul would remain as an abolic double of the living. Orphism, however, would remain as an Orphism, however, included a sophisticated doctrine of personal salvation, and individuals held personal responsibility for their acts and were the masters of their own destiny. A hardly significant fact in the history of religion is that the notion of individual blame was born in ancient Greek with Orphism. But at least people had, taking people as responsible for their own journey, which is not something you get with the Homeric religion. According to Junito Brendel, the discovery of the gold tablets in Orphic cemeteries was particularly important in understanding Orphism. These tablets were placed around the neck of the initiate when they died and contained a description of life in the underworld so that they would know the path to follow when leaving the world of the living. The initiate must avoid drinking the water of forgetfulness from the spring of Lethe. He should instead drink from the spring of Mnemosyne, which would preserve the memory of their true identity through the previous incarnations. Okay. So it's like there's a veil of forgetting. It's like there's a way to prevent forgetting. It might be related. Some people talk about, in mysticism, like, don't go through the white portal, or don't go to the light, any of the tunnel, because then you forget everything. I don't know what to say about that. Honestly, I think it's more based on your frequency. So trying to plan what you're going to do when you die so you don't mess it up. I don't know. Something gives you bad vibes about that whole thing. It's fearful, I think. And I think it's missing the point. Increase your frequency, then you're good, right? Orphic cosmogony can also be clearly understood through these and other important archaeological discoveries, as well as the Orphic gold tablets. Brandau, 1991, cites the Derveni papyrus as an important source on Orphism, and Walter Willey, 1944, acknowledges the existence of a historical Orpheus, founder of the mystery religion at Thrace. The world of Hades was divided into three parts: Tartarus, the lowest part; Erebus, the intermediate part; and the Elysian Fields, a third private part for heroes and important initiates. The concept of the afterlife is strangely similar to the tripartite Christian division of the animic world into Inferno, Purgatory, and Paradise. Also, the Elysian Fields does remind me of Valhalla. There are other characteristics belonging to the Orphic movement that lead many to believe that this was an important precursor to Christianity, as it was radically different from the official Homeric religion. And it does remind me, though, of Egyptian religion and Hermetics, which may well be an influence on it. In addition, the mythical founder of this movement, the magician Morpheus, I did not mean to say that, but there is a reason. In fact, I'm glad I made that mistake, because Orpheus and Morpheus, I mean, symbolically in the Matrix, the film, isn't that like maybe Morpheus is meant to be an Orphic figure? It's kind of funny that I said Morpheus, isn't it? Okay. Where was I? Right, I was trying to say, get it right this time. Okay. The magician Orpheus was called the fisherman. See Willie 1944, which is a particularly Christian epithet. The fish is a well-known Christian symbol. So was it the age of Pisces by then? No, it wasn't. It was, but interestingly, before the beginning of one age, you get a little bit of it before it happens, and after the end of an age you get a bit of it as well, I think, because it's a bit like the idea in astrology where if you're on the cusp of the next month or the month before, you'll be a little bit of those qualities. That's where I see it, but with ages, as above so below, right? Yes, and the fish is related to the age of Pisces, whatever, which is a Christian symbol. The historical context of Orphism is an important precursor to Christianity. As an important precursor to Christianity, he could have been attracted to Jung. He was searching for the roots of spirituality in the Western world, threatened by modernity and the goddess of reason, which would be Athena, maybe? I don't know. I think I'm overanalyzing that. So just like, yeah, the goddess of reason. Perhaps the historical and symbolic I'll turn the page eventually. Oh, there's some interesting stuff coming up here. How much longer in this chapter, though? Just curious. Oh, we're not that far off. I don't know how long I've been going on for, but I'll carry on. Perhaps the historical and symbolic significance of the two religious movements of Gnosticism and Orphism explains the important presence of the divinities Phanes and Abraxas in the Systema Monditiosus. Whatever. Gnosticism and Orphism are the two systems that synthesize the foundations of Greece and its predecessors in the Judeo-Christian religion. Although there's also arguably Egyptian influences on it, as well as obviously Judaism was itself an influence which was influenced by Zoroastrianism and other things, maybe even Sumerian religion. So there you go. But Jung would have searched for these in order to recula por mieux sorta, which means something. I don't know what it means. He also used this as a basis with which to systemize his findings from his experiences recorded in Liber Novus. The development of the mandala in Jung's work. The symbology of the mandala has a very significant role in Jung's work and is one of the themes that led him to becoming so well known. In the same way that as other themes became popularized, such as synchronicity and the psychological types, most people do not understand the real meaning of the symbolism of the mandala as the protector of the psyche and an expression of the essential totality of the individual, but also the self, I would add. We've also considered some important texts on the theme of the mandala in Jung's work. His commentary on The Secret of the Golden Flower, 1957, A Study in the Process of Individuation, 1950A, and Concerning Mandala Symbolism, 1950B. However, the development of this theme reaches its climax in his later work, Ion, 1951, which I haven't even got. I should, anyway, I'll carry on. In this dense book, a complex series of mandalas appears in the perfectly symmetrical form. A complex series of mandalas appears in a perfectly symmetrical form. These being the quaternions that Jung used to describe what he called the structure and dynamics of the self. See illustrations 6, 7, and 8. So I'm going to explain it if you're not watching the video, but I will show you now just so that you know what's being talked about. So that is the first one. It's basically like a diamond shape, basically, with a square middle bit. But yeah, that's the first one. That's the Lapis Quaternio, right? But what you get is a series of Lapis Quaternios forming illustration 7. It's basically 4. Suppose you get the Lapis Quaternio, but you make it 2D, and then you repeat it 4 times onto itself, pile it up 4 times, and then make a larger one out of the 4 combined in a sort of fractal kind of way. That's illustration 7, which you can see here. I'll bring it closer. Oh, yeah, which you can see there. And that's an interesting symbol. And then there's illustration 8, which is a bit different for sure. How does it connect? Oh, I see. Yeah. So if you're looking at this, illustration 8, wait, yeah. If you look carefully, going around, you see a series of 4 diamonds repeating themselves, going round and round and round, whether it's clockwise or anti-clockwise. Yeah, you see? These diamonds repeating. And so it reminds you of the hero's journey in one sense, because it's a repeating cycle. But in a sense, it certainly represents a cyclical process. So it will become clear as I read on what this relationship means. And it's got an arrow around one way and an arrow around the other. So it's a series of eternal transformation. That is part of it. And illustration 7 does show them going up as 4 stages, which are part of a larger stage. And that larger stage could be, if you zoom up further, could be seen as a smaller one in a larger one again. And that it's continue in a fractal way, going up in scale and down in scale. But another way of looking at it, it's just simply having the 4 repeat themselves, as in illustration 8. As you can see, all 3 of these illustrations are fundamentally linked. They're just different perspectives of the same thing, but they're trying to illustrate something. So to really get it clear, so there's a circle in illustration 8, there's a circle, then there's essentially 4 diamonds going round in a continual cycle round that circle, essentially. Why did Jung choose quaternions to express the structure of the archetype of the self? Here it is worth remembering the symbolic importance that Jung gives to the number 4 throughout his work as representations of totality, calling this Quaternion archetype. The Quaternion archetype. I will add that this makes a lot. So in the hero's journey, right? If you combine the hero's journey with the law of one, this is where it will start, and with this Jungian symbolism. I think that it actually creates something quite clarifying here. So in the hero's journey, it's a cycle going around, right? You start the hero, it's like the stereotypical of the story. The hero goes on this journey, he denies the story, the journey event at the beginning, and then he's given this mentor figure, he meets this woman, mysterious woman, all of these different stages, right? And midway through, it seems like everything's lost, right? In a tragic story, this is where everything starts to go wrong and isn't rectified. In typical story, this is like, it looks like all is lost, but through going within, and the dark night of the soul is part of this, which the character goes through a sort of dark night of the soul sort of process. They look within, they make a transformation, and then they start the fight again, and they or struggle, whatever it is, and they go through a series of more tests until eventually they go back to where they came as a new improved person, and like they're given like a sort of what's the word? It's like their success is celebrated in a sense by other characters and stuff, right? So if this is a romance, it might end in a wedding. I think for some reason, like 2 weddings and a funeral came to mind, and this idea that there's this early wedding, a funeral in the middle when everything's really sad, and then there's like a wedding at the end. I don't know. I mean, it's been ages since I watched that. I can't remember how it goes. Romance, it's not my thing generally in terms of what I watch. But yeah, it's like often the point in the action flick or whatever when it looks like the heroes are fucked, right? Like, oh no, what's going to happen? It's like, oh yes, but I have this lightsaber from my grandparent or whatever, and now everything's resolved or something, right? But it often represents some psychological thing, or at least something passed down to them in some way. Anyway, you get it in most stories, to be honest, most good ones, or most ones that resonate with people. Anyway, now the idea I've got here is that, so you go through this applies to different scales of story. Each day is like a story. In a sense, each hour, each episode that me recording this, for me, is a journey in a sense. Or for you listening to it, it's a journey. There might be a point where I mess up and mumble and stumble over my words to the highest degree. And that's my dark night of the soul of this episode. And there might be a point where you just can't bear listening to it any longer, but you're like, oh, no, that's interesting. I'm going to carry on. But it can apply to a lifetime or even many lifetimes. It can apply to a nation. It applies to loads of different scales, right? And the idea is it applies on all these different scales. It's like a cycle, right? So you see illustration 8, right? A cycle of 4 stages that keep repeating, 4 diamonds that keep repeating and cycling around. Now, on a short scale of time, you go through this process, right? And it's through a series of things you learn by going within. These are things you learn and improvements you make and little journeys you make. And then you go to the next lesson you need to learn and stuff. And then you go through, it's like a board on the game of life, right? You're going around, and each time you learn a lesson, you complete a small cycle and you make one step of progress in the greater cycle, right? And at every level, this is how it works. Each time you complete a cycle, you make progress in a greater cycle of a greater scale of time and everything, right? So, and in a sense, this is represented in these diagrams, right? Just as you compare illustration 8 to the hero's journey, you could also compare it to ages, even the whole system of astrology ultimately repeats itself. And you can divide it by 4 as well. Interestingly, yeah, so there's all sorts of interesting features here. And it keeps cycling around. It never really ends. And that you could say the outer one, the outer circle, could even be the Ouroboros in a sense. And everything is contained within that. So it's a holistic symbolism of these three diagrams, this diagram. The illustration 7 is also holistic because there's the diamond at the edge around it, and then within it there's 4 smaller ones. And even the first one, Lapis Quaternio, well, there's, well, it's based on, it's got 4 sides to it on the side. Anyway, so there was that. Anyway, so is there anything else I can take out from this? It's very interesting. But yeah, so I'll just carry reading, I guess. But yeah, it's really, I really like how these 3 things, the hero's journey, these Jungian quaternios, and the law of one repeat, because ultimately there's this idea of each. So the idea being, after each, you complete a density, and then there's 7 of those, then you repeat the whole process as another octave. Now that's involving 7 repeated in a fractal way, but you can break the whole thing up in different ways. Anyway, why did Jung, not that paragraph. I think I'll repeat it just to really make it clear. Why did Jung choose quaternions to express the structure of the archetype of the self? So this is something that the process, the self, the soul goes through, but in a sense, it kind of represents the journey of the soul, in a sense, represents the soul, and the journey of the universe represents the universal soul and stuff like that. It's all connected. Everything's holistically one, as above, so below, and all that. So here's worth reminding that here it is worth remembering that the symbolic importance that Jung gives to the number 4 throughout his work as a representation of totality, calling this the Quaternion Archetype. The archetype of the number 4 appears at various points in Jung's work. And I would add, I wish I knew the symbolism of 4 numerology. I kind of know 1, 2, and 3, but 4 I'm not so sure about. So if you look that up, you might see a significant, you might see in terms of symbolism, some sort of alignment or correlation here between what we're talking about, what these quaternions express, and the symbolism of the meaning of 4. But I'm not going to look it up right now. If I knew this was coming, I would have prepared it, but that's not how I'm doing these readings. So the archetype of the number 4 appears at various points in Jung's work. The individuation process has 4 parts, namely the 4 stages represented by the ego, the shadow, the anima or animus, and the self. Jung also named the 4 stages of analysis as confession, elucidation, education, and transformation. So a confession might be accepting in the first place that you got a problem, right? Elucidation might be getting to know no. It would be communicating it to yourself or others, and a sort of really getting to know what is that exactly, understanding what you're even accepting, I guess. No. It's knowing it is the first stage, and that would be linked to confession, I guess. Accepting it would be relating to elucidation. Forgiving yourself might be linked to education, and transformation is what comes from that, which would be love yourself. Why am I linking that to opening the heart chakra? I don't know, but that's what came to mind. Anyway, I'll carry on. Jung also named the 4 stages of analysis. Yeah, I said that. There are also 4 psychological functions in Jungian typology, and the structure of analytical framework is quaternary. The analyst's unconsciousness, the patient's unconsciousness, the analyst's unconsciousness, the patient, and the patient's unconsciousness are the frame that supports the quaternion of the transference. Dreams have a quaternary structure from a Jungian perspective, comprising presentation, development, climax, and solution. The quaternary structure of dreams follows the basic structure that also appears in the Greek tragedies and in fairy tales. These have a basic quaternary structure comprising the dramatis personae, description of the characters, development, peripetia, climax, and lysis, solution. So I was right to be talking about the hero's journey there. It is fundamentally linked. Something else came to mind when I was reading that, but I don't know what it was. So I guess I'll carry on. The presence of the number 4 in the rhythms of nature, the 4 seasons, the 4 phases of the moon, the 4 primary colors, and their 4 cardinal directions, among others, means that the number 4 is a fundamental reference in the organization of human consciousness. Maybe beyond human, maybe. It also appears in various traditions across a range of peoples with marked symbolic significance. The categories of space and time are the Kantian a priori for the organization of reality. Space, perceived as ternary with its 3 dimensions, required a 4th element, time, in order to configure space-time totality. Similarly, time perceived through past, present, and future requires a 4th element, space, for the organization of the totality of the perceived world. In both cases, we have a 3+1 structure, creating a quaternion of perceived reality. Edinger, 1996. So yeah, I don't have anything to argue about with that. Makes a lot of sense. There's a sort of 2 is a sort of 1 is sort of linked to creation. 2 is linked to a sort of balance. 3 is linked to a sort of moving. It's like taking these 2 points of 2 points of opposites that are balanced and sort of integrating them together into something new. You could compare it to even to the idea of not Engels, what the fuck I'm talking about. I mean, Marx kind of took that idea, but was it the dialectic that Hegel talked about? Doesn't have to be interpreted in a materialist way. Probably better off interpreting it in a more idealist way. Makes a lot more sense that way. But there we go. The idea of that's a triangle. Now, if you think about what these quaternios, they're kind of formed out of triangles, right? So, I mean, the diamond shape that we see at the beginning with a square in the middle and 4 triangles going down and 4 triangles going up from that point. And then illustration 6. Illustration 7, we see a big diagonal square, essentially. And there's a downward triangle and an upward triangle because it's split in half. And in the downward triangle, there's, you could say 2 diamonds, and in the top one, there's 2 diamonds. And those 2 are basically made up of an upward triangle and a downward triangle, an upward triangle and a downward triangle again, with do circles in between each quote diamond, right? And fundamentally, the cycling diamonds, again, are made out of triangles. So 4 is a fundamental symbolism here, but these 4s have 3s in them. And 3 is made out of an integration of 2 opposites into each other. So 3 is fundamentally rooted in 2, right? Now, what is 2 rooted in? Well, it's a repetition of 1, again, right? Or a division of 1 into 2 parts. So fundamentally, it shows that it's all coming from 1, the law of 1, right? The monad. And everything, even when you, 2 is a balance of 2 different halves or aspects of the whole. 3 is an integration of 2 opposites. 4, but plus 1 is the cyclical process of 4 stages within the whole. And space and time as well. So, the sophisticated structure used by Jung to describe the archetype of the self in Ion can be considered to be a mandala unfolding on various levels in subjective and objective space. Jung bases this on the complex thinking of the Gnostic school of the Nascens and its wealth of images to illustrate what would become the basic structure for the archetype of the self. The Nascens, meaning the snake worshippers, according to the etymologies from the Greek nas, meaning snake, were a group of Gnostic thinkers from the 1st century whose traditions became known through the writings of the bishop Hippolytus. Hippolytus's texts on the Nascens are cited at length by Jung at various points of his collected works, principally in Ion. The Nascens belong to the group of Gnostics called the Orphites. You see the connection there? Orphism, Orphites. From the Greek Orphis, meaning snake, who attributed a libertarian role to the presence of paradise, who attributed a libertarian role to the snake of paradise, as in a liberating role, right? Which it says rescued man, but I think it means rescued. Which rescued man from a cruel Jehovah so we could gain consciousness. I mean, also think Kundalini yoga involves the spiraling up of through the chakras, which is symbolized through a snake. Now, there is maybe a phallic symbology there, even though the Kundalini yoga is meant to be feminine symbology, so actually I might be off on that. But basically, yeah, there's a snake spiraling up, and that's related fundamentally to spiritual awakening. Now, if we consider spiritual awakening, and we consider the Nascens symbolism of the snake being liberating us, and the idea that they consider the figure of Jehovah in traditional Christianity, the Romanized Christianity, to be, the Gnostics considered that figure to be an archon, right? In fact, the demiurge. So they didn't consider Jehovah, or there's other words for that, but they didn't consider that figure to actually be the genuine creator, but rather a phony creator pretending to be the creator, which I actually think is likely. And archons are fundamentally more like servant-to-self beings, fundamentally. So, yeah, imagine a self-serving narcissistic being saying to worship them and like basically gaslighting people and like being very violent and tyrannical. I'm sure you're acquainted with why that figure might be seen in a tyrannical light, especially, you know, there's all sorts of cases from the Bible of that aspect of Jehovah in the Old Testament. So the idea is that the original Christians or early Christians of the early Gnostic Christians, they had a fundamentally different perspective. The idea would be that Jesus of Nazareth himself was, whether it's by Asian ideas, or at least, if not that he was a wanderer, that he was on a spiritual mission, essentially. Well, of course, he's Jesus, right? But the point is that it's much more in line with the Lord One, that sort of thing. And there's a reason why the Christ consciousness is taken seriously in the spiritual awakening idea. And this relates actually to, as you think of, what is it? A Course in Miracles, which is supposedly a channeling of Christ. But anyway, so they saw Jehovah differently as one of the archons. They didn't see it as Abraxas, by the way, but they saw it as one of the archons. Kind of like a demon, in a sense, the demiurge, yeah. Psychologically, the Gnostic snake can be considered to be the personification of the anima. The Gnostic sources that Jung researched contain a rich symbology and interesting interpretations of Old Testament, primitive Christian, and Greek texts, bringing together these traditions and expressing powerful symbols using wordplay. According to Edinger, 1996, this way of expressing symbols using wordplay is very similar to the structure of the dreams of contemporary man. And if they used, if the Gnostics used hallucinogenic drugs, which I've heard that they did, that would make sense given that it was dreamlike. But anyway, it says, I consider it important that the complex symmetrical structure of the self can be seen in the final unfolding of the Systema Munditosius in the Liber Novus, Jung's initial intuitive perception of the mandala. Here, the idea is still being formed, and its culmination can be seen in Ion, where it is organized into a theoretical system that can be used to perceive both man and the world, and in which Gnosticism, Orphism, and alchemy are the basic references. And yeah, we're done with the chapter. But that is that's really interesting to me. I was looking forward to dealing with that bit where we've got these quaternions, because Max Durat, the YouTuber, has talked about that, the quaternions, at one point in one of his episodes, and I really found it interesting. And I haven't got the book, Ion. I have got the Archetypes of the Collective Unconscious, which is similar, but I don't think that book it mentions these quaternions. And given my interest in the hero's journey and the Lord One and other things like that, I really enjoy it. I find this interesting. So the next chapter, chapter 9, is Philemon, and I guess you're going to have to find out when you watch that or listen to that. Is there anything else I would like to add? I'm not sure. But, well, honestly, not really. Nothing comes to mind right now. So I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly learned some interesting things. I hope you did too. And bye for now.